Hey, what's going on, everybody? In this video, we're going to be doing the used book tag. This was an original tag created by Time for Books, and she's got a great channel. She finds tons of interesting books at really good prices. Encourage you guys to go check her channel out, and the information will be down below. So let's get started. Question number 1. Tell us about your favorite secondhand book you own. Alright, I have 2 books for this question. The first one is a book I haven't read yet, but it's probably my favorite book that I got at a great price. I think I paid one whole quarter for this nice hardcover with the dust jacket, and it's Barbarians Within the Gates of Rome, a study of Roman military policy and the barbarians between 375 and 425 CE by Thomas Burns. And this book deals with Rome's policies in regards to the Germanic barbarian populations at the turn of the 5th century, which was a very tumultuous time for the Roman Empire. By then, the Western Empire had already been in a downward spiral for quite some time, and the Eastern Empire, well, technically not Byzantium just yet, but the Eastern Empire was starting to take precedence over the Western one. But anyways, the Germanic populations were putting a lot of pressure on Rome, and while I don't think this was like the only thing that caused Rome to collapse or whatever, it definitely was a significant factor. And since it covers the period 375 to 425, this would include the first Germanic sack of Rome in 410 by Alaric of the Visigoths, and I just think it'd be an awesome book to read. I just haven't got around to reading it yet for whatever reason. Now, for my favorite secondhand book that I've actually read, I have The First Punic War by J.F. Lazenby, and I just think this is one of the best written history books I've definitely ever read. Well, let's start that one over. For the best secondhand book that I've actually read, I've gone with The First Punic War by J.F. Lazenby, and I just think this is one of the best works of historical scholarship that I've ever read. And it's on a fairly obscure topic. While the Punic Wars are pretty popular, it's usually the Second Punic War that everyone's thinking about, and it kind of overshadows the Third and especially the First Punic War between Rome and Carthage. But when I picked this up, I believe there's only one other book in English on the Punic War, and I probably should go check that one out too. In some ways, the First Punic War is even more important than the second one. It set a lot of precedents for the growing Roman Republic. It's the first time they left Italy, for example, with military force. And the First Punic War is just inherently interesting, even though it was mostly just fought in Sicily and around the waters of Sicily. There was an African campaign that was pretty disastrous, led by Regulus. It was probably the longest continuous war, I should say, in ancient history, lasting 23 consecutive years with no peace in between, and also probably had the biggest naval battle in terms of people involved, and maybe ships involved too, at the Battle of Economus. And there are some other battles, like for example, Battle of Red Cliffs in ancient China, that also compete for that title, but Battle of Economus is definitely at least in the top 3. Anyways, I enjoyed reading this book. It's a great historical work, well written. It's the perfect amount of research, and I just thought it was great, and that's why it's my favorite secondhand used book. Question number 2. Tell us about your favorite place to buy secondhand books. For me, I don't have very good luck with thrift stores around my area, and I think it's just because they're fairly small, so they don't have a big selection of books. But about an hour drive from my house is a used bookstore. It's huge. The only problem is it's fairly disorganized. It's just very vaguely, fiction or classics or sci-fi, that sort of thing. But they're all just sort of strewn together once they're in there. So it's kind of fun actually, just looking for the gems and the diamonds in the rough, basically. But my only problem with it is the history section is just this pitiful little alcove, and it's almost all modern American political history, which I don't care about. But anyways, I found lots of good books there, especially on philosophy and fantasy and nonfiction, except for history. But anyways, I love it there, and that's where I go there. Question number 3. Show us 3 recent thrift store books that you're excited for. Alright, on my last book haul from that used bookstore I was telling you about, I picked up, for a nonfiction book, I picked up When Elephants Weep, blah, 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 blah. I picked up When Elephants Weep by Jeffrey Masson, and my wife and I are animal lovers. We have 4 different pets, plus the local wildlife and that sort of thing. So I was definitely interested when I saw it. I believe this book delves into, obviously, the emotional lives of animals, and it's, I think, going to be like a popular science book on that topic, and how animals have feelings such as, happiness and anger and sadness and all that sort of thing. I'm definitely excited to read it. Never read anything quite like this before, so I'm not really sure how exactly it's going to go, but I'm definitely looking forward to reading it. I also picked up Macedonian Armies After Alexander, 323 to 168 BC. This is a Osprey Publishing book, which has a bunch of different, very specific military books. They're all very tiny, but they are so detailed and jam-packed with very specific information that it's still worthwhile reading them. This happens to be a Men-at-Arms one. They also have a Warrior series and an Elite series, I believe. And there's literally hundreds of volumes in each set. And they can be very, very specific. And like, for example, this one, Macedonian Armies After Alexander, is talking about the Macedonian armies known as under the Diadochi, I think it's Diadochi. Anyways, which would be under like the Seleucid Empire and the Antigonids in Ptolemaic Egypt and that sort of thing, which there's not a whole lot of books on, but this book gives you a lot of good information. Okay. Plus, these books have original illustrations that are commissioned just for the books, and they show accurate representations of the arms and armor and that sort of thing of the time period involved, which is really cool. Yeah. And that's why I love it, and that's why I'm looking forward to reading it. Lastly, for a fantasy book, I picked up The Grand Design by John Marco. I've never heard of him, never heard of the series, which happens to be of Tyrants and Kings. But I love the cover and I love the title, so I thought I'd give it a shot. This happens to be the second book in the series, so I went ahead and got off eBay The Jackal of Nar, which is the first book in the series. And I don't know, I read the back excerpt and it sounds really cool, and look forward to reading it. I'll tell you guys what I think after I read it. Alright, question number 4. Tell us about the worst used book that you've ever bought. And I have 3 different selections for 3 different definitions of the word worst. The first one is this book on Socrates, the Man and His Thought, and I haven't read it yet. But the reason it's the worst book I've ever bought is because it's the worst conditioned book I've ever got. As you can see, it's literally just like completely falling apart. And I probably should get around to reading it before it crumbles into dust. Probably the worst overall book I've bought was The Greek Mind by Walter Agard. And first of all, it's like an ex-library copy where they put that plasticky protection stuff like over it. But the thing is, like, the dust jacket was literally like cut apart and glued back on, just like the title and that sort of thing. It's just really odd looking, and it's just a stiff, odd kind of book. The first part is a essay, which is pretty good, on the Greek mind. But as you can see, it's not a very big book. And the other 2/3 of the book are literally just little paragraph excerpts from Greek writers. And I don't really like that, partially just because it could possibly be taken out of context, but it really just doesn't give you a good picture of the source itself. I'd rather actually read the Iliad than read a couple paragraphs from the Iliad, to be honest. So that's why I believe this is one of the worst books I bought before. For my most disappointing book was Rome Against Carthage. And yes, it's a book on the Punic War, so it's inherently cool, but it covers all 3 wars, but it's kind of short, and there's no notes on the inside of the book. There's a couple appendices in the back, but it was kind of just like a narrative history, and it didn't really give much explanation on a lot of the topics that they covered or reasons that they give for certain things. It was just sort of, this happened, this is what we think happened. And it was just kind of shallow, and I didn't like it compared to the other ones, compared to other Punicore books I've read. Question number 5. Give some tips for people who might be unfamiliar with going about buying used books. For me, I've not had good luck with thrift stores, but that probably just depends on like where you live and the thrift stores that are around you. I have found some gems there, just not many. For me personally, if I'm looking for a good book that I want to keep and like put on my shelves and that sort of thing, and either make sure it's in good condition or has the dust jacket and that sort of thing, I actually buy usually from eBay, for example, or a place called Abe Books. Lots of times they have the actual images instead of just the stock photos, and sometimes in the descriptions they detail dust jacket included or missing dust jacket, because I really do hate when I want like a really good book to put on my bookshelf and it doesn't come with the dust jacket. But anyways, and you can really find some good deals if you just like keep looking for it over a certain period of time. For example, most of my Fellow Society books here are almost all secondhand books that I bought off eBay, that sort of thing. And as long as you just are patient, you can get good deals on most things. Alright, question number 6. Not so much of a question, but tag some of your fellow channels. Alright, I'm going to tag Rebecca at Rapacious Reads for tagging me in the pirate ship tag. I'm going to tag Justin at Ghost Reads. Good name, Justin. And also Corners of a Bookshelf. I like all 3 of these channels. I encourage you guys to go check them out. I'll leave links down below too. And remember, read victoriously.